welcome to the Westin MCAT podcast with your host, Ahmed
and special guest, Isabella and Polly.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Westin MCAT podcast. And I'm really excited to be joined by a guest on our podcast this week. I'll let her introduce herself because she'll do a better job than I will.
Hi, my name is Isabella, and I'm super excited to be here. At Westin, I wear a couple different hats. I'm an MCAT coach as well as an onboarding specialist. So in those two roles, I meet individually with students. As a coach, I meet with students who are preparing to take the MCAT, and we talk a lot about mindset and goals and scheduling and just kind of keeping a good balance between studying and sort of like a work-life balance. And that's a little bit what Ahmed and I are going to be talking about today. And then as an onboarding specialist, I meet with all of our students who have enrolled in tutoring hours with us, and I sort of help facilitate the student tutor match. And so I get to know all of the students to help give them the best possible pair. And then Ahmed and I work together sometimes on the free trial sessions that we host for the Westin MCAT course for tutoring services. We host free trial sessions a couple times a week. And yeah, so that's sort of what I do here at Westin. But I took the MCAT about a year and a half ago, like last January. And I took it during my undergrad, and so as well as Ahmed. And so we're here today to talk a little bit about what that's like studying while you're in school and you have all your extracurriculars and your friends are not studying for the MCAT and how you feel very left out. Maybe you felt the same way I did. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to my MCAT studying days, I tested at the end of the summer, which is a little bit different than testing in January, I feel like, because I'm studying during the summer a lot. And that's where the FOMO really kicks in. You know, your friends are, they got beach days when you're taking practice exams, and they're playing spike ball when, you're working or whatever. And it really does take, a strong sense of discipline to sustain your MCAT studying, but also make time for the things that matter. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Like you mentioned, is like just how to, move the needle forward with respect to MCAT studying without neglecting other areas of our lives. And I'm curious, like, what was the January test day like come holidays?
Yeah. So I took the exam January of my senior year of undergrad. So I sort of had like senior fall. I was studying. Well, I had, I guess, kind of started studying over the summer a little bit, but I had an internship. And so didn't really have a lot of time to devote to studying, but I studied most of the fall. But after my exams ended in December, I sort of had a month of just MCAT studying before taking the exam in mid-January. And yeah, I mean, the holidays, that was the holiday break, obviously, from college. My family celebrates Christmas and New Year's, and so we were doing that, and I was still studying. But I have to say, there was something, and maybe you felt this way too, about being home for the summers. There was something nice about being with my family and with my friends from home, and I really, in a way that I tried not to let impede on my studying, I definitely spend a lot of time with friends from home. I found that very grounding, and people that I kind of missed hanging out with during the semester. But it was definitely hard, and it's sort of the kind of thing where you have the finish line, you have your test date, and you're just sort of plowing through until then. I remember I was on the sailing team in college, and we had a winter training trip, and I had scheduled my exam so that I would take the exam and then literally like the next day boarded flight down to Tampa, and we were Sarasota, and we were in Florida training for like the next week. So that was something I was like really looking forward to, is being able to get back out on the water. And I sort of had that as like a oasis after the MCAT. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, honestly, like that's actually super important. I tell this students all the time, like have something kind of big that you're looking forward to, either the evening of test day or like the day after or something. Like it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but like you've got dinner with your friends, or you've got, a trip to the beach, depending on where you live and the time of year, or like something that you're really looking forward to after the exam, that when you start to get a little bit tired, or you start to get a little bit uncomfortable, you can think of and say, all right, no, like keep going, right? Like I want to get to that. Like I don't think, like
Yeah,
obviously you
yeah.
care about the MCAT, but like just having that um incentive, and it's not really an incentive, but that thing, like you said, that oasis
Yeah,
to look
no, it
forward to.
keeps you going. And it's I mean, at least for me, it was the reason why I probably could have pushed it back another week, but it was the reason why I didn't. And I was just like, nope, taking it this week. Actually, that was a whole other thing that maybe I should mention, is that I was one of those people who signed up for the exam. I messed up the AAMC, the scheduling thing, where you have to get in the queue and sign up, and I messed
Right.
that. So I didn't get the date that I wanted or the location that I wanted, and I had to switch it a couple times, and I didn't realize how much money that was going to cost me. So definitely
Yeah.
pay attention. Read the instructions. It's very clear. Like get on the system at 11:45 a.m. Eastern. Like now that I look back, I'm like, that was very clear. But it was something that I messed up and ended up costing me a lot of stress, because while I was studying, I had these dates in mind that I thought I wanted to take the exam, but I didn't have it nailed down until like a month before. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
if you're a planner like me, try to get it nailed down a lot further in advance so that you can really look forward to it in that kind of
Yeah.
way that we're talking about, without having that be another stressor. Um,
Right. But yeah, I think, that forward thinking is critical. And we touched a little bit there on like how to give yourself a sense of positivity on test day with what comes after. But you and I both took this exam during our undergrads, and there's something to be said for the balance that you have to find between, your GPA, your MCAT, and then your life outside of academia. And I would say it may have even been harder for you than me, just because I did take it in the summer and I wasn't taking courses. And I also, since it was in the summer, like athletic season was done, right? I wasn't in practice or training camp or anything like that. Granted, it comes with a different set of challenges, and that the weather's nice and you want to
yeah.
go outside and you want to do all these
Absolutely.
things. But, what was your way of staying grounded in
Hmm.
life, right? Like just with
Yeah,
respect to
yeah.
your family, with respect to your friends, what sorts of things would you do to make sure that you could still do well in the MCAT, you could still do well in school, but you weren't completely, you know, leaving behind those other important elements of your life?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Something I will say about taking the exam during the school year, if you are sort of a typical undergrad student, I know like a traditional sort of applicant, and you're pre-med, is that you're probably taking classes that are relevant to the MCAT at the time.
For
So
sure.
I took biochemistry that fall and then took the exam in January. So for me, that was a very easy lead in, and I think back to that fall and how much of my brain space was just constantly occupied by MCAT topics, because it was also I was taking a class on enzymes that fall, like, and I'm sure any pre-med would have a similar experience, right? Where between the prereqs and your electives, you're probably doing something relevant. But at the
Right.
same time, that makes it even more important to do something outside of MCAT and pre-med, your pre-med extracurriculars and your pre-med classes, because it's so easy to get really, really lost. For me, that was sailing, and that was, you know, having to go to practice multiple times a week, having to, you know, getting to spend time with my teammates, or like having team meetings, or like things that were kind of on my calendar that I couldn't move. Um, so that was sort of my
Right.
way around it, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard, and it's hard not to get really swallowed up, I think, by the MCAT during those times, and to have hobbies also that maybe aren't as inflexible as something like athletics. But for me, I really like playing the piano. I really like reading and trying as much as those things are already hard enough to keep up with in college, but I think trying to keep up with them as much as possible and not viewing the time I spent doing them as time wasted. Like, oh, I should have been studying for the
That's
MCAT, but
huge.
instead I spent an hour, playing the piano. Like, no, like think of that all within reason as
Right.
part of your process. And don't be hard on yourself for taking that time. In fact, like probably need to build in that time. And that's something I think probably the most frequent topic aside from like test day anxiety or just anxiety about how I'm going to perform that I talk about with my coaching students is always like avoiding burnout and just,
Yeah.
and it's so different for each person and each person has a different, family situation or work situation or friend situation or whatever it is, but everybody's sort of running or like running in the same circles in that way where everybody's trying
Right.
to figure out how do I avoid burning out while I'm taking like what is frankly like the most important exam of my life so far that I really don't want to have to take again, or if I am retaking it again, I want this to be the last time, like I really want to get it right. And so
Right.
there's that added pressure. Uh so yeah, I think maintaining those extracurricular activities, but in a way that you, like I said, viewing them as part of the process, I think is really important.
I think you made a really important point there about not viewing the time doing non-MCAT things as a waste. And I always view that as like a necessary recharge, right?
Yeah.
Like I almost equate it
Yep.
to a battery, right? And if you never recharge that battery, there's going to come a point where it stops working.
Another Ahmed analogy. Love it.
You got to start trademarking these. But
You should
um,
write like a book and then you can publish them.
you know what? It's funny. I've contemplated that in the past. Um,
Like
just like
like writing a book in general or like of your like little
well,
sayings.
no, it wouldn't be a it wouldn't be well, it'd be like a 5-page book of like Ahmedisms, but no, I not to get too far off topic, but one of my close friends is a really accredited editor. She has her
Mm,
own like editing service, and
that's cool.
she's extremely talented at what she does, and huge help with my primary and secondary applications, I must add. But
Yeah.
we've had like discussions about like writing a book about the MCAT or writing a
Mm,
book about, my sort of, we'll say, unorthodox path through college or,
mm.
because she and I actually worked together at my old job, and like lessons learned, teaching students. Like it's been a
Yeah.
thought. Obviously now it's not really high on the list of priorities.
Stay tuned, everyone. You heard it here first.
Yeah, maybe.
One
You know
day.
what? Maybe one of the first 2 summers in med school, maybe that's something I pick up as a
Yeah.
project, but we'll
Well,
see.
this
We'll
is a
see.
good segue into, I mean, I had sort of mentioned this to you a little bit earlier. I was talking about sort of books for pre-meds, but what I meant was like, well, I mean, I think there are certain nonfiction or fiction books that people sort of say like, oh, every pre-med must read or, sort of help you get in touch with patient
Yeah.
stories or things like that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
there's a
What's it
great book.
called? The ethics book. What was it called? Do It Right? Something right.
Oh, wait. Yes, I know what you're talking about. I haven't read that
Um
one.
Something right. And like I remember going through like the interview process and like my best friend's wife is like a top doctor and like
Uh-huh.
a health network, and she was like, you got to buy this book
You
on
have to
Amazon.
read
You got
this
to read
book.
it. Never even like
Yeah.
didn't even add it to my cart. But yeah, no, sorry, you were saying.
No, no, I was gonna say, but there's a great book called The Emperor of All Maladies about cancer and like the history of cancer, but it was written by an oncologist. So
Oh, interesting.
maybe one day that'll be you.
Yeah, we'll see. I think I've always had an interest in whether it's like writing a book or like doing a TED talk or something like that,
Mm, yeah.
because a big part of my life anyway, when I was younger, was like just having people that I could turn to for advice. Like, my parents didn't grow up in North America, so like, um, there was a lot of sort of learning through mistakes that I went through at a young age, and I just remember, how significant certain people were in my life, and
Yeah.
it's just kind of naturally carried over into me now being in a position to try to pay it forward. But in any
Right.
case, on the note of, that battery analogy and recharging, I think that's so important because at least I remember for me when I was studying, like the MCAT was my identity, and not in a good way. Like it was so
Mhm.
I want to give myself credit because I was committed to doing well, but like it was to
Mhm.
the point where like one of my teammates invited a bunch of us out to their cottage, and I packed like two of my MCAT books. It's just like, man, like
Like,
you can take a day and a half off, and it's like
yeah.
it's nothing's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Uh, and like that's the advice I would give myself, like my MCAT studying
Mhm.
self, is like, number one, start earlier so you can
Mhm.
afford to take those days off. I think I started like 3 months to the day, like
Mhm.
before my test date, which is cutting it very close.
Yeah.
Um, Granted, I did have the benefit of taking lots of prereqs that helped, but
Mhm.
3 months is still cutting it close. I
Yeah.
think if I started at the 4 month mark, I could sprinkle in a day to, go to an amusement park, or a day
Yeah.
to, go to the beach, whatever. And that's just so important.
Yeah. I think one of my study regrets, this doesn't really have anything to do with balancing, but sort of along these lines of like if I could go back and do it again, was I didn't do all of the AMC materials that I could have. I mean, I know it's
Yeah,
a lot of material to get through, but I think I should have taken a couple more practice tests. But it was because I didn't leave myself enough time, sort of like on your note. It was
right.
really only a month before my exam that I had of this like full-time grind studying, and a month is not enough time to get through all of the AMC stuff. And so
No,
I think it's a little bit of a fallacy that you have to save all of that for the end. Like I don't know. I mean, I don't
yeah,
know what you advise your students, but I think, Jack has talked about this before where it's like, obviously you shouldn't be like using it all up and then turning to third-party resources. There is an
right.
order, but it doesn't have to be so strict as we sometimes it seems
Yeah,
like the MCAT prep world talks about it, where it's like once you start these, like there's no turning back, and it should be the only things that you ever look at. There's room for a little bit of nuance, I think. So.
definitely. It's funny. I was actually just meeting with a student, I think yesterday, and he's testing middle of August.
Mhm.
And he's studying full time. And basically what we've done is like I think he had a group of third-party exams. And for me personally, I like giving my students a little bit more than a week between practice exams. If you think about it, day zero is actually taking the exam. You're spending all of day one and some chunk of day two reviewing it. You're taking day six a little bit lighter because it's the day before the exam.
Mhm.
And so that leaves you days 3, 4, and 5,
Yeah.
which is just 3 days to actually build off of.
Learn new things, right?
Exactly. And so I like leaving 10 days because that gives you like
Yeah.
an actual 7 days where you can make progress.
Mhm.
And the student asked a great question. He said, "Don't you think 10 days is a little long?" And he framed it in the context of like, I'm not going to be taking enough exams. And one of my favorite things to do is take those third party exams that you've got, chop them up into
Yeah.
sections,
Yeah.
and then do one a day, right? For like 4 days in the
Yeah,
middle,
yeah.
right? Because now do the math, right? The section takes an hour and a half. Say you spend 2.5 reviewing it, that's 4. For most students that are studying full time, they still have another 2 hours in that day that they can do something MCAT productive. And if you're studying part time, well, perfect. You've just done your 4 hours for that day.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
when you were full-time studying that summer, like how many hours a day did you feel like you actually were studying or were productive? And did it feel like a job? I mean, you kind of mentioned that that sort of became your identity, but sort of what was that like? And how did you find balance when there was really nothing else kind of going on?
Yeah, and no, it's funny you mentioned that as well because it was still like kind of COVID, kind of not.
Mm,
Like we're on the way out from COVID, but like everybody's still like
a little.
COVID cognizant, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, but I've always it's weird. Like I've always been the person that like I'm not gonna sit down for like 2 hours and then take a half-hour break. I just work on way smaller cycles where like
Mm,
I'll work for 30 minutes, take a 15-minute break,
mhm.
or I'll work for maybe up to an hour. But like I don't do well with like long, just like study chunks and then taking a break
You
that's a
also
little
need
bit
to move
longer.
locations. I'm a big like nomad. I need to be moving
Yeah,
at all times.
for me, it's not even so much about moving around like within the house or anything, because I
Mm.
love my desk. Like I love the
You have a good
mindset,
setup.
I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, like I feel like I can just like enter my own bubble, and once I put my headphones on, like, oh, you can't touch me. But I think what's important there is like I just like I know myself,
Mm,
right? And so somebody else who could sit down for an hour and a half and just plow through content, hey, kudos to you. That's
right.
not me, right? Like
Mm.
I just need to be,
But this
like,
is this is a good question though. So how did you feel then when you had to transition to the hour and a half long section times? Because that's something
yeah,
that I remember sitting through like an English, like I had a 90 or 80-minute English lecture as well that fall that I was studying. And I really like the humanities, but I remember thinking like I need to sit through this lecture and pay attention for 80 minutes because I'm like practicing somehow for like I was big on that.
yeah.
I was turning everything into MCAT practice, like even things that didn't have anything to do with the MCAT.
But it's this element of endurance, right? And it's
Yeah.
it's funny. I love how you phrased the question. You said, "How did you transition to
Hmm.
the 90-minute sections?" And I would argue that I didn't. And,
Mm.
and here's what I mean by that. I would give myself little breaks in the
Mhm.
sections. And so, like for me, Chem Phys was always my strongest section because
Mhm.
I mentioned, my parents didn't grow up in North America, and so math was universal.
Yeah.
English was not. And so, like, I was just always good at math as a kid because it was the only thing I could understand. Like, the
Mhm.
number three is the number three in any language, but grammar was not happening at that point in time. But in any
Mhm.
case, just the math skills and having taken a major that was chem and physics heavy,
Mhm.
um, I
What
felt very
major was
comfortable with that. I was biomedical science, but
oh, okay.
through my first 2 years, I had taken two physics and two like plus two
Mhm.
labs. I had taken four chems, so two inorganic, two organic. All four of them had labs. I hadn't taken biochemistry like you hadn't, but
Yeah, yeah.
like I felt like very, very prepared for Chem
Mhm.
Phys. And so anytime I found myself ahead of schedule, like I would just sit there and just close my eyes for a minute or 30 seconds and just like
Mhm.
have a little reset and then I could keep going.
Yeah.
Didn't have
That
that luxury in cars,
yeah.
unfortunately.
I was gonna say I remember doing that in cars because for me, my biggest thing, and I know like Azai definitely talks about this, but like read slowly. Like that was something that I really caught on sort of as my prep went on. But I was like, I would sometimes like open up a practice passage and read the first two paragraphs and then be like, what the heck did I just read? Like, and then you waste
Yeah,
time. You have to go back and read it again. So for me, giving myself those breaks in cars was important, just simply to reset before I started a new passage. But
yeah,
I like the way that you kind of made the MCAT work for you,
right.
like as opposed to, you're someone that works a little bit better on these maybe like 15, 20-minute cycles and like
Yeah.
you figured out how to do that within the time frame as opposed to maybe stretching into an area that you would not have performed as well simply because like your brain doesn't like to work that way as much.
Yeah. I think, it is worth noting, like, if necessary, like, I'll hunker down and get my work done. I
Ahmed can
don't want to.
only pay attention for 20 minutes at a time.
Yeah, I would never be able to teach classroom sessions
I
in
would
that.
say in the middle of a session, you're just like,
Yeah,
okay.
just quick timeout. Let me get a water break. But no, it's I think, and I say it to students all the time as well, is like everybody's different, right? So
Yeah.
like, be mindful of that, like when you read things on the internet. Not to say that the internet's a bad place, but it's just you don't have the
Definitely a
context,
bit of
right?
a minefield.
Yeah, like you're
Um,
getting things that work for individual
yeah,
people,
exactly.
but that might work for them. It might not work for us. So just be mindful of that. But in terms of your week, like say like in any given week, I
Hmm.
know like for me, I was a big, as contradictory as this may sound, but I was a big structure person.
Okay.
Like in terms of like, I would say it was almost pseudo structured. And what I mean by that is like each day I had a set of objectives that I wanted to
Okay.
accomplish, but you're
Yep.
never going to catch me going through an hour by hour calendar. And
Okay.
I give myself flexibility within the day because I trust myself. Like I'm going to get this stuff done. When it gets done, no clue. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I just know like this is on the agenda for today. And that's sort of how I operated. I made sure to give myself a day off each week.
Mm,
And I personally found it really helpful to have a day each week where I wasn't necessarily learning anything new. I was just revisiting the material from that week and material that had given me a little bit of trouble in previous
mm,
weeks. Um, as I got later into my prep, that turned into more of like revisiting questions I had gotten wrong and things like that. But
yeah.
that was sort of my structure. It was like 5 days where I was progressing or moving forward.
Mhm,
1 day where I was just, putting it all together, we can say.
mhm.
And then 1 day I just wasn't touching the MCAT. But I'm curious, like, what was your structure kind of like?
Yeah, good question. I think like during the semester, I had sort of a daily objective, which was every day I was going to do one or two cars passages, typically the Jack Weston passage of the day, and or one from like 6 months out. So if it was like September 1st, I would do like March 1st, like whatever.
Right,
Um, and Anki. I was using the Miles Down Anki deck on the Jack Weston website like religiously and just sort of had unlocked everything and had it all like randomized. And I sort of used that as like a pseudo content review for topics that I had like kind of learned already.
right.
Um, I hadn't taken at that point a biology class or anything where I had learned about the different organ systems or anything about psych soc. So
Yeah,
for me, that was content learning throughout the semester. So I'd say every day, like, I don't know, I forget what I had my Anki set to. It was probably like 25 new cards, but like getting through Anki and however long that took, which was typically around an hour and a half,
yeah,
I would do that every day, as well as a couple cars passages and reviewing them. So say that's half an hour. And then whatever I needed to get through in terms of topics. But unlike you, I'm a very big Apple Calendar person. Like even now, I schedule everything. And so I would go in and schedule random blocks of like, today you need to do like the digestive system and you have 2 hours to learn it. And like, that was what I was going to be doing. Um, but yeah, so I was a little bit more structured, but I think I had a lot more variety in my days just as a function of being in college and every
right,
meal, you're eating with your friends. So like you break it up a lot
right,
more like that. And then on the weekends, typically I was competing. Like we had sort of like our stuff on the weekends. And so
right.
I would try to do, if I remember correctly, like every week, I think I would try to do a cars section, like a 90-minute, like 9 passages. At some point in the weekend, I would also try to factor that in. But I
Yeah,
think it was easy to study during the week
because
because I was like already studying for my classes and such.
right.
Uh,
And yeah, actually, I didn't think of that. Like you're in this studying mindset, whereas
yeah.
I kind of wasn't. I was in,
Yeah, no,
off
that's hard.
season.
Like to me, somehow that seems harder. Like to sustain that for 3 months.
Yeah, it's tough in the sense that like like you just finished studying
Mhm.
and you're about to study more, but in that time between, you're studying by choice almost.
Yeah.
Um, but it's interesting because like I was fortunate that a lot of the material I had seen before,
Mhm.
and the material that I hadn't seen, I was going to see. And so whether I took the MCAT, then biochem, or biochem, then the
Mhm.
MCAT, just by nature of there being redundancy, I'm
Yeah.
benefiting in some way, right? And I
Yeah.
think students ask that a lot, like, "Hey, is it okay if I take the exam without having taken this prereq?" I would say, like, if you are confident that you can self-study, you have the resources in place, then yeah, because one way or another, you're going to benefit, right?
Yeah.
And so you study for biochem on the MCAT, and maybe that helps you turn a 3.8 in biochem into a 4.0. Or you
Yeah.
take biochem before the MCAT, maybe that helps you turn, a 127 in that section to a 129, right?
Right.
Either way, you're benefiting. But um, no, that's really important to point out. And thinking back to studying over the summer, um, I think once you're in that routine, I think routine's a big word. Like for everyone that's different. Like for me, I had like those rough outlines throughout the week of like what was happening each day, but I had that built-in flexibility. Once I found that and found that it worked, it was kind of smooth sailing from there. And I know you mentioned you were kind of in that study mindset already with school, but you had those built-in breaks through like living with, friends and having sailing and things like that. I think it's important for people to know what their outlets are
Yeah.
and, like we said, like allow time for them. I'm curious, you mentioned just like blocking off time. I saw something the other day. I think it was an ad. Pretty sure it was an
About
ad.
time blocking.
Yeah,
I know
time
what you're, it's like an
boxing, I
AI
think.
thing, right?
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. No, I didn't use that, but
Well, not
I,
the software, but like the idea of just
but
saying,
the
all right,
idea of,
this chunk of
yeah,
time, MCAT, go.
yeah, yeah, because I had my classes scheduled. I was still taking like 4 classes that fall. So I
Yeah.
had them already populating my calendar. So like the times in between and the times around, it was sort of easy to like, you just click and drag a little box and you're like, okay, like this
Right.
is time that
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
to do this. Um, but it's funny, I think about now I have now I work full time doing research and I work remotely and it's a lot harder to do that because I have so many less things scheduled throughout my day. So
Right.
like now when I do it and I'm stretching out blocks and it's like 4 or 5 hours long and I'm like, okay, like be realistic though. Like, are you gonna?
Right.
Whereas if you sort of block out an hour and a half, like I think that's realistic where I could be like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna sit down for an hour and a half and like try to do this. Um,
And I think even mentally, like as you get started in that block, to know that's only an hour and a half
yeah.
is a lot less intimidating than saying, shoot, like I'm locked in here for the next 3 or 4 hours. And I think that also just speaks to like have breaks. Like breaks make you study more effectively, but also at the same time, don't be stubborn with your breaks. Like I was really big on listening to my body, if that makes sense. And like what I mean by that is like, or just like listening to how I'm feeling. Like if I'm sitting there and I'm studying and it's just like it is not processing.
Yeah.
And even though like say I had a break scheduled 30 minutes from now, I'm gonna take it now
Yeah.
because the next 30 minutes are just gonna set me further back. Because if it's not processing, I'm gonna spend this 30
Yeah.
minutes again later
That
redoing
is
what I
kind of
just
a
did.
waste of time. Like that is the waste of time if you are kind of pushing it beyond a limit that you know
Exactly.
it's just not happening for you in that moment. And I mean, I think that's a good way to think about studying generally.
Yeah.
Or like read it, whatever you do for your classes, reading, writing, like if
Yeah.
it's not happening. I mean, not that you shouldn't persevere in certain situations, but
Right.
there are times when like it's not happening and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, we're human, right? And sometimes it's just a sign to take a step back and take a little break. But um, I guess to wrap up, we talked about what advice we would give our past selves
Mm,
as far as MCAT studying goes. What advice, like, say you got a coaching student or
mhm,
a newly onboarded student, and you know they ask you, I've got my MCAT coming up. If you could give me, one or two pieces of advice as far as finding balance and not
Uh,
letting this exam, despite how important it is, take over?
mhm.
What would you say?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. And it's something that I feel like in a way I kind of talk about a lot with different students. My thing is that you want to feel like you're in control of the exam and not that the exam is in control of you.
Yeah,
And so whatever you need to do that's healthy to cope and make you feel like you're in control is probably a good thing. So for me, like I think part of that, like scheduling my time down to like, yes, that's in an effort to be more productive, but that also makes me feel like I'm in control somehow. Or when I decide deliberately that I'm going to take time to have dinner with my friends and I'm going to sit there for an extra half hour afterwards after we finish eating and I'm not going to worry about it. Like that's another way of sort of reclaiming control or like reclaiming your time as you get closer to the exam. Something that I probably went a little bit overboard with was like playing with my controlling my sleep schedule and the food that I was going to be eating and how long it was going to take me to drive to the testing center, like things like that. Things that are actually in some ways productive but make you feel like you have control, like I think are good to kind of like identify what those things are and sort of like identifying what your outlets are to help you maintain balance because a lot of the balance just comes from a sense of feeling like you're not being swallowed by this exam or it's not just some like
right,
beast that you can't fight. So, yeah, I would say a lot of what we talk about in early sort of coaching sessions is like identifying things that make you feel like you're in control or outlets that you have. And so
right.
I think if I could go back to like I would have done that a lot more deliberately for myself. So,
Yeah,
yeah, what about you? When you
I
get
mean,
a new student, what do you say?
I fully agree with what you said. The one thing I would add to that is be strategic in how you're allocating material to cover. And what I
Mm,
mean by that is like for me, I knew chem phys was my strength. I was more than happy to have a higher volume day that included a lot of chem and physics because I knew it wouldn't scare me. It was stuff
mm,
I had seen before. I knew I could get more done because the excitement of recognizing things was going to get me through that day.
mhm.
Whereas, like, I remember studying fluids specifically, never seen it before.
And
Took
now you're the expert on fluids.
I wouldn't go
That's the
that
word on the
far.
street.
I don't know what streets you're living on, but clearly not mine. But no, jokes aside, that topic took me 2 days, whereas I went through like equilibrium, kinetics, acid-base chemistry, and stoic in one day
Mhm.
because it'd been all stuff that I'd seen through my undergrad and through high school even. And
Yeah.
so I would encourage students to reflect on, okay, like what are the topics that I'm actually going to enjoy learning or reviewing because I've seen them before or I know I'm good at them, etc. And then be kind to yourself on the days that you're studying stuff that may be more difficult. Like metabolism, I gave myself, I think, 3 days just
Oh, yeah.
because it was never
That
something
was
that was intuitive to me. And it was so much info. And I was like, listen, I'm not going to be unrealistic and say I'm going to get it done in a day because I know myself. I'm going to need to look at this like at least 3 times.
Also,
Give it
you
a
were probably learning that for the first time, no? If you had never taken biochem or
I
mostly
had
first.
learned glycolysis, like I learned cellular respiration.
Okay,
Glycolysis
okay.
through the electron transport chain, but gluconeogenesis, glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, beta oxidation,
Yeah,
all
all
that stuff just entirely new.
brand new.
Right? And like, don't get me started on ketone bodies. Like, what are those? But that would be the advice I would give as well is like, in addition to knowing what your outlets are, know what your strengths are.
Mhm.
And the days that you're targeting your strengths, or better yet, mix, right, your
Yeah.
strengths with a weakness, right?
Mhm.
And so on a given day, have one or two things that you enjoy studying and are good at, and then sort of I almost call it like the broccoli theory. Like
You're
hide
like
the
a
broccoli.
child. You like
Yeah,
sneak in the broccoli.
exactly. It's just like hide the broccoli behind like the chicken breast or rice. Like
One thing I'll add before, because I know we have to wrap up, but I think a good note to end on also is like be kind to yourself. I think that sometimes when you get in the mindset of studying for the MCAT and or maybe your friends at school or whatever, or in your work environment are also pre-med, also studying for the MCAT, you forget how incredible it is that you're even in the cohort of people that is studying for this exam. Like the fact that you have the motivation, the drive to do it, not to mention all the knowledge that it's going to require, like just who you
Yeah.
are as a person, that you're willingly going through this process in an effort to have a career to literally serve others for the rest of your life is incredible. And so when you have moments where you're feeling down or like you can't do it, just remember that you're doing something that is absolutely amazing. And it's very easy to lose sight of that when you're in the grind or like when you're in certain environments. So that would sort of be my parting words for
Words of wisdom,
the
words to live by.
podcast.
Well, I appreciate you joining us today, Isabella. We're gonna have to bring you back again at some point.
Oh,
You're a
goodness.
natural.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thanks to all of our viewers again for tuning in to another episode. Happy studying, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of the Jack Westin MCAT podcast. Take care, guys.